Okay, let's jump right into this explainer on the EPA's incredibly strict 2022 Construction General Permit requirements. We are focusing specifically on Module 5 of the EPA's official inspector training course today. Now, what's really cool about this specific module is that it features a virtual 360 site inspection. It's essentially a guided, interactive tour that simulates a real-life field inspection. It's totally where the rubber meets the road, taking all these dense regulations and turning them into actual on-the-ground fieldwork. So, whether you're managing a massive piece of infrastructure or just a local build, understanding exactly how to evaluate a site is absolutely crucial.
Here is our game plan for today. We're going to follow the logical journey of an inspector. We'll start with becoming a qualified person, then look at where to inspect, what to look for, tackle daily dewatering inspections, and finally wrap up with documentation and reporting.
Starting with Section 1, Becoming a Qualified Person, and the legal prerequisites.
So, before you even think about stepping foot on a construction site to do these checks, you might be wondering, who is actually allowed to conduct these site inspections? Can you just hand a clipboard to anyone on the crew and tell them to go look at the mud? Well, for a long time, the rules were honestly a bit loose. And the EPA realized that a lot of permitted operators were failing to conduct adequate inspections. So, they decided to draw a hard line in the sand.
The permit now explicitly states that only a qualified person can perform these duties, period. This is to ensure that the person actually possesses the right skills to assess stormwater controls effectively. You have to know the core principles of erosion and sediment control, you need to understand how to actually install and maintain those controls, and critically, you need to know exactly how to accurately fill out the required reports.
This right here brilliantly illustrates a major shift in enforcement. To combat what we might call compliance fatigue, the EPA really tightened things up for any project permitted on or after February 17, 2023. The days of just relying on general knowledge and kind of winging it, yeah, those are officially over. Now you absolutely must complete the EPA's specific course and pass their exam, or hold a valid equivalent certification from an approved program. It's a strict, unavoidable prerequisite, no exceptions.
Moving on to Section 2, Where to Inspect and Mapping Out Your Site Walkthrough.
Now that you've got the right credentials, let's step onto the site. When you do your routine walkthrough, and this is exactly what they simulate in that 360-degree virtual tour, you literally cannot cut corners. You have to visually examine every single one of these vulnerable areas. You're looking at the raw, unstabilized dirt where excavation just happened. You're checking the controls themselves, like your silt fences and basins. You're inspecting your material and waste storage areas, because a chemical spill is just as bad, if not worse, than sediment runoff. And crucially, you have to follow the water. You must inspect all drainage ways in every single point where water actually discharges off your property.
All right, Section 3, What to Look For. Diving into the observation requirements. Okay, so you know where to look, but once you are actually standing in these designated areas, what exactly are you looking for? Evaluating what you're seeing is the real core of the inspection. You aren't just checking a box to see if a silt fence physically exists, you're figuring out if it's actually doing its job or if there's a pending environmental hazard. To do this right, you need to follow a systematic mental checklist. First, check your controls. Are they actually minimizing pollutants? Second, identify any maintenance needs. If a control needs repair or replacing, you've got to flag it right away. Third, actively hunt for conditions that could lead to spills, like a piece of equipment that's starting to leak oil. And fourth, check those discharge points and adjacent stream banks for any visible signs of erosion or sediment deposits that came from your site.
Let's look at Section 4, Daily Dewatering Inspections. This is the high-stakes monitoring.
We can kind of consider dewatering the final boss of the inspection journey. Dewatering is when you're pumping accumulated stormwater or groundwater out of a trench or a foundation. Because this water is being actively forced out under pressure, the risk of severe pollution is incredibly high. Take a look at this image. This is exactly what we are trying to prevent. Notice that stark, awful contrast between the clear water and that dark, muddy sediment plume heavily polluting the receiving water body. When you pump water off a site, you can literally cause an exceedance like this in a matter of minutes if your controls fail.
Because of that immense risk, if you are dewatering, you must inspect the operation once per day while the discharge is actively happening. That includes checking treatment controls, like the dewatering bags you're seeing here. And to be clear, that's not once a week or just after a rainstorm. Every single day that pump is running, a qualified person needs to be out there monitoring it.
And while that water is discharging, you are legally required to look for specific visual pollutant indicators at the point of discharge. Are you seeing a sediment plume? Is there an oily sheen sitting on the water's surface? Maybe a strange odor, an unusual color, or a buildup of foam. If you observe any of these things, it means your dewatering controls are failing, and you have to initiate corrective action immediately.
Now, to take it a step further, if your site is discharging dewatering water into what the EPA classifies as a sensitive water, like a lake or stream that's already impaired for sediment, you have to do way more than just look at it. You'll actually use little glass vials called cuvettes, just like the ones shown here, to conduct daily turbidity benchmark monitoring. That means you are physically taking samples to scientifically measure the water's clarity and prove your discharge isn't exceeding legal limits.
Finally, Section 5. Documentation and reporting. The golden rule of compliance. We've completed our site walk, we've carefully monitored the dewatering, but the job is not done until the paperwork is filed. In the world of EPA compliance, documentation is literally everything. And I want you to remember this number, 24. You have exactly 24 hours from the completion of your site inspection to finish and sign the official inspection report. You absolutely cannot put this off until the end of the week.
Let's talk about what actually goes into that report. It has to comprehensively capture a ton of details to serve as your official legal record. You need the basics, of course: inspection dates, start and end times, and personnel names. You must track weather triggers, for instance, logging exact rain gauge readings if your inspection was triggered by a quarter-inch storm event. You need a detailed summary of your findings and any maintenance required. For dewatering, daily photographic evidence is mandatory. You need photos before and after treatment and at the discharge point. And finally, the official certification. It must be signed by the permitted operator or a qualified subcontractor.
Once that report is signed, you must keep copies accessible on site. And pay attention to this retention rule. These reports must be retained for at least 3 years from the date your permit coverage expires or is terminated. 3 years! Because let's be honest, if it isn't written down, signed, and retained in the eyes of the EPA, it simply didn't happen.
So, keeping all of these strict 2022 construction general permit protocols in mind, how are you going to optimize your next inspection? Do your teams actually have the right EPA training and certifications? Are you truly monitoring those daily dewatering checks, and are you beating that super strict 24-hour reporting clock? The health of our local ecosystems literally depends on how you handle this stuff in the field. Think about it, structure your walkthroughs carefully, and stay curious out there.